The emotionless alien queen broke down in tears when she saw the human soldier HFY. The Zethar Empire was vast, stretching across planets that no human had ever seen. In the heart of this empire stood a grand, cold palace constructed from stone and metal, its spires reaching high into the sky. The capital city was always buzzing with activity, but it was not a place where emotions thrived. The Zethar had long since learned to suppress them. They were a race built on logic and strategy, and their queen, Nevara, embodied these qualities perfectly. She ruled with a sharp mind and a heart that showed no signs of warmth, for in her eyes, emotions were weaknesses. But now the Zethar Empire was crumbling. The war with humanity had lasted for years, and it seemed as though there was no end in sight. The once proud fleets of the Zethar had been decimated, and their once unified empire was fractured. Queen Nevara, standing at the balcony of her palace, could see the remnants of the once great ships burning in the distant sky. The war had taken everything, her people, her home, her sense of purpose. Yet, despite the destruction, Nevara held her ground. Her face remained as expressionless as ever, but deep within, a storm of thoughts raged. She had inherited this war from her predecessors, but now it was hers to end. She had done everything she could to keep her people safe, but nothing seemed to work. The human soldiers, with their reckless courage and sheer determination, had managed to hold their own against the might of the Zethar fleet. But she could never allow herself to show doubt. As queen, she had to remain strong for her people, even if she felt the weight of their suffering pressing down on her shoulders. The door behind her opened, and a figure stepped into the room. A Zethar commander, his face unreadable, approached her, standing at attention. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice cold as the air around them. "We have received word from the front lines. The humans are preparing for another attack. Their forces are stronger than we anticipated." Nevara turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes narrowing. "And what of our fleet?" she asked, her voice like ice. "We have lost contact with several of our ships," the commander replied. "It seems that their communications have been disrupted. We believe the humans have found a way to infiltrate our systems." Nevara's gaze hardened. She had expected this. The humans were clever, resourceful. They had learned to adapt, to fight in ways that no one had predicted, and now they were winning. "You will deploy the last of our forces to the front lines," she ordered. "We cannot afford another failure." "The humans must be stopped." The commander nodded and left, leaving Nevara alone with her thoughts. As the door clicked shut behind him, Nevara let out a slow breath. The weight of the Empire's fate was on her shoulders, and she knew that every decision she made from this point forward could be the difference between victory and extinction. Meanwhile, far from the palace, in a hidden human base on a desolate moon, Captain Jace Harper was preparing for his mission. He had been a soldier for most of his life, fighting in countless battles, but none like this. The Zethar were not like any other enemy humanity had faced before. They were ruthless, emotionless, and utterly committed to their cause. But Jace had never been one to back down from a challenge. He had seen the horrors of war, the destruction it caused, and the lives it tore apart. But there was one thing he believed with all his heart: the war had to end. His mission was simple but dangerous. He had been chosen to infiltrate the heart of the Zethar Empire, to gather intelligence that could help humanity turn the tide of the war. It was a suicide mission, but Jace didn't hesitate. He had lost too many friends to the war. Too many innocent lives had been caught in the crossfire. This was his chance to do something that could bring peace, even if it meant risking everything. The briefing had been brief, the stakes high. Jace was to enter the Zethar capital, find their central command center, and gather as much information as possible. If he succeeded, the humans could mount a decisive attack that would cripple the Zethar war effort. If he failed, humanity would lose the war. As Jace prepared to leave, he thought of his family. His younger sister, Emily, who had grown up in the war, never knowing a time when peace existed. His parents, who had sacrificed so much for the cause. He couldn't fail them. He couldn't fail humanity. With a final glance at the base, Jace boarded the stealth ship that would carry him to the heart of the Zethar Empire. The journey would be long and the risks high, but he had trained for this. He was ready. When the ship finally reached its destination, Jace's heart raced. The Zethar capital was a formidable fortress, a sprawling city of steel and stone. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal, the remnants of battles fought long ago. As the ship descended through the clouds, Jace's eyes scanned the city below. He had seen pictures of it before, but nothing could prepare him for the reality. The Zethar were a proud race, but their city was a reflection of their downfall, massive, cold, and lifeless. The ship touched down in a dark alleyway, hidden from the main thoroughfare. Jace climbed out, his boots making no sound as they hit the ground. He quickly assessed his surroundings, noting the patrols moving in the distance. He would have to be careful. Every step he took in this alien world could be his last. As Jace moved through the city, his mind raced with thoughts of the Queen. The Zethar were ruled by Queen Nevarra, a figure as enigmatic as she was feared. No one knew much about her, except that she was cold, calculating, and utterly merciless. Many of the human soldiers whispered stories of her ruthlessness, but Jace had always found it hard to believe in such tales. How could anyone be so devoid of emotion? How could a ruler, a leader, not care about the lives of her people? But as he moved deeper into the city, he realized that there was more to the Zethar than he had imagined. The people walked the streets with their heads down, their eyes blank. They seemed like machines, going through the motions of life without ever truly living. It was as if the war had drained all the humanity from them, leaving only hollow shells. Jace couldn't help but wonder how the Queen could stand to rule over such a people. Could she really be as heartless as the stories claimed? Or was there something more to her? Something that even she couldn't control? His thoughts were interrupted as a sudden noise echoed through the alley. A group of Zethar soldiers appeared, their sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Jace ducked into a doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't afford to be caught. If they found him now, it would be over. He held his breath, staying perfectly still as the soldiers passed by. Once the danger had passed, Jace continued on, determined to complete his mission. Little did he know that his fate, and the fate of the war, would soon take a turn that neither he nor Queen Nevarra could have ever predicted. Captain Jace Harper moved quickly through the dark alleys of the Zethar capital. His boots were silent against the cold, hard ground, and his senses were sharp, always scanning for any signs of danger. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was massive, its towering structures of steel and stone casting long shadows across the streets. The air felt heavy, thick with the tension of the war that had dragged on for far too long. Jace had spent years fighting against the Zethar, but nothing had prepared him for this. In a way, being on their homeworld felt almost unreal. He had been trained for missions like this, but the reality of it was far different. It was as if the entire planet was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. One wrong move, and his mission would be over before it had even begun, but Jace was determined. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to fail. He had to get to the heart of the Zethar Empire, gather the intelligence that could finally bring an end to the war. And for that, he needed to get closer to the source, the Zethar Queen, Nevarra. He had heard stories about her, of course. No one knew much, but there were rumors. They said she was cold and emotionless, a ruler who ruled by sheer power. Some claimed she had no feelings, that she was nothing more than a machine, an alien being with no heart. Jace had never believed those stories. He thought that no one could truly be so ruthless, so detached. Maybe he was wrong. He would find out soon enough. His objective was clear: infiltrate the palace, find the central command, and gather whatever intelligence he could. It wouldn't be easy. The Zethar were everywhere, watching for anyone who didn't belong, but Jace was good at what he did. He had been trained in stealth, in blending into his surroundings. If anyone could pull this off, it was him. He reached a narrow street that led to the heart of the palace complex. The buildings around him were tall, their surfaces gleaming with a cold, metallic sheen. He took a deep breath and pressed on. As he neared the palace gates, his heart began to race. He could see the Zethar soldiers patrolling the area, their sharp eyes scanning every corner. They were relentless, never letting their guard down, but Jace had trained for situations like this. He had done his homework. He knew the patrol schedules, the blind spots, the movements of the guards. He slipped into the shadows, using the cover of a nearby building to move undetected. His mind was focused entirely on the mission. He couldn't afford to let anything distract him, not even the feeling that there was something different about this place, something unsettling. As he reached the palace gates, he paused, glancing around. The guards were few in number, but they were highly trained. The challenge would be getting past them. Jace pulled his cloak tighter around his body, blending into the shadows. He waited for the perfect moment, when the guards turned away just enough for him to slip through the gate. The moment came. He darted forward, quick as a shadow, and slipped through the gates unnoticed. His heart pounded in his chest, but his training kept him steady. He was in. Now he needed to find the queen. The interior of the palace was just as cold and imposing as the outside. Long, winding corridors stretched before him, each one leading deeper into the heart of the Zethar's power. The walls were adorned with strange, alien symbols, and the air was thick with the scent of metal and dust. Jace kept moving, silent as a ghost, making his way through the palace. The deeper he went, the more he realized how little he understood about the Zethar. Everything about this place, the silence, the cold beauty of the architecture, the sense of isolation, felt alien. It was like stepping into a world that had no place for warmth, for life. The Zethar were a species born from war, a race that had never known peace. And yet Jace couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more here, something beneath the surface that no one had ever noticed. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached the heart of the palace, the throne room. The place where Nevarra, the Zethar queen, ruled with an iron fist. Jace stood before the massive doors, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. He had come this far. But now, as he stood on the threshold of the queen's domain, he wasn't sure what to expect. With a deep breath, he pushed the doors open, slipping inside. The throne room was vast, its high ceilings towering above him. The walls were lined with intricate designs, and the floor was made of smooth, polished stone. In the center of the room stood a large throne, made of dark metal and glowing with an eerie light. And seated upon the throne was Queen Nevarra herself. Jace's breath caught in his throat as he looked at her. The stories hadn't done her justice. She was beautiful in a way that was both terrifying and captivating. Her face was pale, almost ethereal, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Her long hair cascaded down her back like a river of black silk, and her posture was regal, commanding. She was the embodiment of power, cold, unyielding, and untouchable. For a moment, Jace just stood there watching her. She had an aura about her, something that made him feel small, insignificant, but he quickly pushed that feeling aside. He had a mission. He couldn't let fear or awe distract him. Nevarra's eyes shifted, locking onto him. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time had frozen. Jace felt his heart skip a beat. The queen's gaze was intense, studying him with a coldness that sent a chill down his spine. She didn't speak at first, just watched him. Jace's hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side, but he stopped himself. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to gather information to end this war. Finally, Nevarra spoke, her voice smooth and commanding. "Who are you?" Jace hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I'm Captain Jace Harper. I've come to speak with you." The queen raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Speak with me?" Her tone was sharp, as if she found the very idea amusing. "You are human. You think you can simply walk into my palace and speak to me?" Jace didn't flinch. "I'm here because the war needs to end. The lives of your people, my people, are being destroyed. There's no reason for this war to continue." Nevarra's gaze hardened. "You think I don't know that?" Her voice was colder now, and her eyes flashed with something that Jace couldn't quite place. "You think I haven't tried to find a way to end this? The Zethar do not surrender. We do not yield." Jace stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "It's not about surrendering, it's about survival. Your people are dying, and the humans, no matter how strong we are dying too, but it doesn't have to be this way." For a long moment, the queen remained silent. Jace could see the conflict in her eyes, the flicker of something he hadn't expected to see: doubt. Nevarra, the cold, unfeeling queen, was beginning to show cracks in her armor. Jace took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We don't have to be enemies. We can end this, together." Nevarra's eyes flickered for a moment, and Jace saw something, just a glimpse of a person beneath the mask of the queen. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The queen stood, her presence overwhelming. She was every bit the ruler, every bit the power that had built the Zethar Empire. But Jace had seen something in her, something that could change everything. Without another word, Nevarra turned her back to him, her voice cold as ever. "Leave. We will talk no more." But Jace knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The doors to the throne room shut behind Captain Jace Harper with a resounding thud. He stood there for a moment, frozen, still processing everything that had just happened. His heart raced in his chest, but his mind couldn't stop replaying his brief encounter with Queen Nevarra. She had been so cold, so distant, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It was almost like pain. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. He had a job to do. This wasn't about sympathy or understanding the Queen's motives. This was about bringing an end to the war. The longer he stayed, the more dangerous things would become. His mission depended on him getting in, getting what he needed, and getting out. But a part of him, despite the danger, couldn't shake the feeling that Nevarra was more than just the ruthless queen of the Zethar Empire. Maybe it was because he had seen her in a moment of weakness, a crack in her icy exterior that she had quickly closed off. But it was enough to make Jace wonder. Could she really be the heartless ruler the stories made her out to be? As he made his way through the dark corridors of the palace, Jace's thoughts kept returning to her. Her words echoed in his mind. "We do not yield." It was clear she was a ruler bound by pride, a ruler who would never consider surrender. But deep down, Jace couldn't help but feel that there was something else, a deeper conflict within her. Was she truly as emotionless as she appeared? Or was there something buried beneath the surface that she had never allowed anyone to see? The palace felt even colder now as Jace moved through its winding halls. It was strange, really. The Zethar had built this place to be a symbol of their power, yet everything about it seemed to speak of a loss, of a once great empire now slowly slipping away into ruin. The walls were adorned with strange, alien symbols, intricate patterns that told stories of battles fought long ago. But now, those same patterns seemed to be fading, as if even the Zethar themselves had forgotten what they once stood for. He had to focus. He couldn't afford to get distracted. The mission was still the same: gather the intelligence, get out. But even as he reminded himself of this, he knew there was something bigger at play. The Zethar had been fighting the humans for so long, but perhaps there was a way to end the war without more bloodshed. Maybe Nevarra, despite all her coldness, could be the key. As Jace turned a corner, he was startled to see a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a Zethar soldier, one of the guards. His eyes met Jace's for just a second, and in that moment, time seemed to freeze. The soldier's face was impassive, but Jace could see the tension in his posture. He was aware of Jace's presence, but he hadn't reacted yet. Jace quickly ducked into a nearby alcove, holding his breath as the soldier passed by. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been so caught up in his thoughts that he hadn't been paying attention to his surroundings. One mistake, one slip-up, and the mission would be over. After a few moments, Jace let out the breath he had been holding and continued down the hall, his steps more cautious now. His thoughts, however, kept drifting back to Nevarra. The way she had looked at him, it wasn't the look of a ruler who had everything under control. It was the look of someone who had been carrying a burden for far too long. Jace knew he had to speak with her again. The war couldn't end with just one conversation. There had to be more to this. If Nevarra was truly the heart of the Zethar Empire, then maybe she was the one who could end it all. But he couldn't do it alone. His mind made up, Jace turned around, retracing his steps back toward the throne room. The guards at the entrance didn't move as he approached, and for a brief moment, he wondered if they even recognized him from before. But they didn't stop him. Maybe they didn't care, or maybe they were too focused on their orders to pay attention to a single human soldier. As he stepped back into the throne room, the silence felt even more oppressive than before. Nevarra was sitting on her throne, her back straight, her posture unyielding. She didn't look up as Jace entered, but he could feel her awareness of his presence. The weight of her gaze was like a physical force. "I thought I told you to leave." Nevarra's voice was low, but the command in it was unmistakable. Jace didn't move. He didn't flinch. He had a reason to be here, and he wouldn't leave until he said what needed to be said. "I can't leave," he said firmly. "Not without trying. This war doesn't have to continue, Nevarra. There's another way. There's always another way." The Queen finally looked up at him, her piercing eyes locking onto his. There was something there, something deeper, something she was trying to hide. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, her expression shifted slightly, the lines of tension around her eyes softening for a brief moment. "You don't understand," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You have no idea what it's like to carry the weight of an entire empire on your shoulders, to be responsible for the lives of your people, even when they are so far from the ideals you once believed in." Jace stood there watching her, his heart pounding. This wasn't the Queen he had expected. She wasn't just a ruler. She wasn't a machine. She was a woman burdened by her people's suffering, trapped by the very empire she had inherited. "I know more than you think," Jace said, his voice softening. "I've seen the cost of this war. I've seen what it does to both sides. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Nevarra's eyes flickered with something that looked like doubt, like a glimmer of hope. But she quickly shut it down, her gaze hardening once more. "I carry it because I have no choice," she said, her voice growing colder. "You don't understand. The Zethar do not surrender. We do not stop until we win." Jace could see the anger building in her, the wall she had constructed around her emotions growing thicker. But beneath that anger there was something else. Pain, fear. "You're wrong," Jace said, his voice strong. "You're not alone. And you don't have to fight a war you can't win. There's still a chance for peace." Nevarra's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Jace thought she would dismiss him entirely. But instead, something shifted in her. The faintest crack in her armor, the smallest break in her stoic facade. She looked away, her expression unreadable. "Peace," she whispered, almost as if she didn't believe the word was possible. "I have lost so much. So many of my people are gone. How can I stop this now? How can I surrender when everything I've worked for is falling apart?" Jace stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "Because sometimes surrender isn't about losing. It's about saving what's left. It's about finding a way to rebuild." The Queen's eyes glistened for just a moment, and Jace saw it, the tear that she couldn't hide. But she quickly wiped it away, her face once again becoming a mask of cold determination. "I don't know how to stop," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to let go." Jace didn't say anything. He simply stood there, offering her a moment of silence. In that silence, something deep inside Nevarra shifted. The weight of her empire was still there, pressing down on her, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't carrying it alone. Jace stood in the silence that had settled between him and Nevarra. The weight of her words lingered in the air like a thick fog. For the first time, he saw her as more than just a queen or a symbol of the Zethar Empire. She wasn't the emotionless, cold leader he had been told about. She was a ruler who had been pushed to her breaking point, a woman who had carried the weight of her people's suffering for too long. The silence stretched between them, and Jace felt a strange mix of pity and respect for Nevarra. Despite everything she had done, despite the destruction caused by her empire, she was still human in her own way. She was still someone who had loved and lost, someone who had fought and sacrificed for the survival of her people. He took a step closer to her, his heart still pounding from the intensity of their conversation. The words he had said earlier echoed in his mind: peace, rebuilding. Could they really make it happen? Could he really help Nevarra end this war? Nevarra didn't move as he approached, her eyes still distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. She had already turned away from him once before, but this time there was a different energy in the room, a kind of raw vulnerability that neither of them could ignore. The Queen, so poised and composed just moments ago, was now struggling with something deep inside her. And Jace knew it wasn't just the weight of the war, it was something more personal. Jace hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. But as he stood there, watching Nevarra's inner turmoil play out before him, he realized something. The Zethar, as powerful as they were still beings who felt. She wasn't some unfeeling tyrant. She was a woman who had been forced to make impossible decisions, a woman who had seen too much destruction to believe that peace was even an option. "Nevarra," Jace said softly, his voice gentle but firm, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to carry the burden of this war alone. You have options, you have a choice." She looked up at him then, her gaze sharp but weary. "You think I haven't tried to stop this? You think I've never considered surrendering?" Her voice shook slightly, a crack in her usually composed tone. "You have no idea what it's like to lead an empire, to have so many lives depending on you. There's no way out, no way to make it stop." Jace could see the tears threatening to fall from her eyes, and it was a sight that shook him to his core. He had never seen a leader, especially one so feared, show such vulnerability. He had heard stories of Nevarra's ruthlessness, of her ability to crush her enemies without hesitation. But standing before him now, she was not the terrifying queen he had imagined. She was a woman who had been beaten down by her own empire's expectations. "I do understand," Jay said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I've seen what war does to people. I've seen the destruction, the pain, but there's more to this than just fighting. There's a way to rebuild. If we both stop fighting, if we both let go of this hatred, we can start again." Nevara's eyes flickered with something that almost resembled hope, but she quickly pushed it aside. She shook her head, as if to rid herself of the thoughts that were creeping in. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The Zethar don't know peace. We've been at war for as long as I can remember. I've only ever known war." Jace took a step closer, his voice soft but insistent. "It's never too late to change. The past doesn't have to define the future. You have the power to end this. You're the queen, you can decide how it ends." For a long moment, Nevara said nothing. She stood there, her eyes closed, lost in thought. The room was heavy with tension, the kind of tension that could only exist when two people stood at the crossroads of a decision that could change everything. And Jace could feel it. The choice was in her hands. Finally, Nevara opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his once more. This time her eyes were not cold and calculating. They were filled with something else, something raw, something real. "I don't know if I can do this," she said softly, almost to herself. "I don't know if I can stop it." Jace's heart softened as he looked at her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the fear of making the wrong choice. But he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, and that was enough. That was all they needed. "You don't have to do it alone," Jace said, his voice reassuring. "I'll help you. We can do this together." Nevara looked at him, her expression unreadable, and for a moment Jace thought she might turn away again, that she might shut herself off completely. But then, to his surprise, she nodded slightly. I will consider it," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "But it will take time. I can't make such a decision overnight." Jace smiled gently, nodding. "I understand, but know this, peace is possible. We just have to be brave enough to take the first step." Nevara said nothing in response, but Jace could see the gears turning in her mind. She wasn't ready to give up the fight yet, not fully. But there was something in her that had changed, something in her that was starting to believe that peace might be within reach. As Jace turned to leave, he glanced back at her one last time. Nevara was still standing there, lost in her thoughts, but for the first time he could see that she wasn't just a ruler of war. She was a person just like him. And like him, she wanted a way out of the endless cycle of destruction. "I'll be waiting," Jace said softly, his voice full of quiet conviction. "Whenever you're ready." Nevara didn't reply, but he could feel her gaze on him as he left. As the door to the throne room clicked shut behind him, Jace knew that the battle for peace had only just begun. But there was hope now. A small, fragile hope, but a hope nonetheless. The days that followed Jace's conversation with Queen Nevara were filled with an air of uncertainty. Both sides of the war had paused, the soldiers waiting for something, anything, that might signal the beginning of a change. The Zethar, still strong but battered, seemed to hold their breath, waiting for their queen's next move. The humans, too, stood on edge, uncertain if this fragile moment would lead to peace or the final destruction of everything they had fought for. Jace had returned to his unit, but his mind was still back in the throne room. He couldn't forget the way Nevara had looked at him, the hesitation in her eyes. For the first time in his life, he had seen a leader who wasn't just a symbol of power, but a person struggling with the weight of their decisions. She was the queen of a dying empire, trapped in a role that had been forced upon her. But for a brief moment, he saw something else in her, something human. The thought of her kept him awake at night, her words echoing in his mind. "I don't know if I can stop it." It was a cry for help, a plea for guidance. She had been carrying the weight of the Empire's expectations for so long that she no longer knew how to free herself from the chains of war. But Jace believed there was a way out. He had to believe that peace was possible, or else everything they had fought for would have been in vain. Meanwhile, Nevara was alone in her chambers, the walls of her palace feeling more suffocating than ever. She had spent her entire life in this palace, surrounded by advisors and generals, making decisions that would affect the fate of her people. But now, standing at the edge of a choice she wasn't sure she was ready to make, she felt more isolated than she ever had before. The Zethar had built their empire on strength, on power, on an unyielding belief that survival meant war. Nevara had inherited that legacy, and for most of her life she had believed in it. But in the quiet of her chambers, with only the sound of her breathing to fill the space, Nevara began to question everything she had ever known. She walked to the window, staring out at the darkened sky. The stars above were distant, unreachable, but they reminded her of something, of the people who had died in this war, of the families that had been torn apart, of the endless cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. How many lives had been lost for nothing? How many more would she sacrifice if she continued this path? Nevarra closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool glass. The weight of her decisions felt unbearable. Every choice she made seemed to lead to more destruction, more pain. Was there really no other way? Could she really surrender, admit that she had failed, and accept peace with her enemies? Jace's words came back to her. You don't have to do it alone. He had said that. But was it true? Could she truly trust someone, especially a human, to help her carry this burden? Her hand reached up to wipe away the tears that had started to fall, but she paused. For the first time in years, Nevarra allowed herself to feel something real. She wasn't the emotionless queen anymore. She was a person, and for the first time, she didn't want to be alone with her pain. Her mind flashed to the human soldier who had stood before her, Captain Jace Harper. He hadn't been afraid to look at her, to see her for who she really was. He hadn't been afraid to offer a hand, even when he knew the risks. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe peace was possible. The more Nevarra thought about it, the more she realized how much she had been lying to herself. She had convinced herself that her people couldn't survive without war, that they could never let go of their pride, their strength. But in her heart, she knew that this wasn't the answer. If she kept fighting, her people would perish, and so would the future of the Zethar Empire. There had to be another way. Nevarra wiped her eyes, standing tall as she turned away from the window. She was the queen, but she was also something more. She was someone who had the power to change things, to reshape the future. She had always believed that power meant control, that survival meant strength. But now, she saw that true power came from within. It came from the ability to make difficult choices, to choose peace even when it felt impossible. With a deep breath, she left her chambers, walking toward the palace's grand hall. The soldiers who stood guard at her door barely glanced at her as she passed, but Nevarra didn't notice. She had made her decision. It was time to end the war. As she approached the grand hall, her heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the Empire's expectations pressing on her shoulders, but this time, she didn't let it stop her. She pushed open the massive doors, and the soldiers inside stood at attention, their eyes following her every move. Nevarra's eyes swept over the room, scanning the faces of her closest advisors. They all knew why she was here. They had waited for this moment, anticipating the decision that would determine the fate of their empire. "Your Majesty," one of her generals began, his voice low. "We've received reports from the front lines. The humans are prepared to attack. Should we mobilize our forces?" Nevarra stood still, her gaze fixed on the general. His words were like a blow to the chest, but she didn't flinch. She had made her choice, and it was time to face it. "No," Nevarra said, her voice steady. "We will not attack." The room fell silent. Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances as though they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The general looked at her in disbelief. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice filled with confusion. "What do you mean? We can't just stop. We have to finish this." Nevarra took a deep breath, her resolve growing stronger with each passing second. "We have fought long enough. I will not send another soldier to die. I will not let more lives be wasted." "But, Your Majesty," the general protested, "the Zethar are strong. Our people are strong. We cannot show weakness." Nevarra's eyes narrowed, her voice unwavering. "We have shown nothing but weakness. The strength of an empire is not in its ability to destroy, but in its ability to build. If we continue down this path, there will be nothing left of us. No empire, no people, no future." The room was still. No one spoke for a long moment. But then, one by one, the advisors lowered their heads, their eyes filled with the understanding that Nevarra had made the only decision she could. The queen turned away from them, walking toward the door. "It's over," she said quietly. "The war is over." As Nevarra left the hall, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had made the hardest choice of her life, but it was the right one. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. There would be resistance, both from within her own empire and from the humans who had fought for so long. But Nevarra knew that peace was worth fighting for. It always had been. And in that moment, as she stepped into the cool night air, she felt a small spark of hope. The war was over, and maybe, just maybe, a new chapter for the Zethar Empire was about to begin.